He's eating a
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the final 10%. My name is Ron Williams II. I am here. I work for AGS, a slot machine company based out of Duluth. I'm a lead producer with them. Been there only for a few months, but was previously in Chicago working as a producer for another company called WMS. Other speakers, you can introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Harrison Pink. I'm a game designer at Hangar 13 Games. Our game Mafia 3 just came out today. Yay. Before that, I was at Telltale Games. I worked on The Walking Dead, Tales from the Borderlands, a bunch of those games. So, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Edie Woefle. I've worked at several indie studios here in Atlanta, and currently I'm working for a logistics startup. I'm a game developer by trade.
My name is Tobe Sexton, and I have a long history, but we're not going to get into all that. But we will get into that. I work with Game Scribes. We're a localization and testing company, and our headquarters in Los Angeles. We've got offices in Hong Kong, San Francisco, and then we just opened up an office in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the Triangle area, and also we have one in Spain. But yeah, I've been doing that for about 2.5 years now, and we kick butt.
Awesome. We've got one more guy we were expecting to be here, but we're not sure if he's going to be here or not. So if he shows up, we'll just go ahead and assimilate him in here. But anyway, you guys have all read the session description. You know what we're talking about here. It's the final 10%. So you've started working on your game. You're really excited about it. You've gotten into the whole thick of things. And then you get close to shipping, get close to finishing it up. And then you realize, oh, there's a lot more stuff that we need to get done. So we're going to talk about those things, what those common pitfalls are, how to avoid them. And there's Joe there.
Hey, I was working on the last 10%.
All right.
Scooch down or down this way?
Over here.
Okay, thanks.
I think he's good.
But before we get started on that, we'll let Joe introduce himself.
I'm Joe. I'm Joe. I'm the Puzzled by Joe guy. A lot of you guys already know me. I kept my hand up today in the keynote. It was fun. That's it.
All right, so the first question that I've got for all of our panelists here is, what is the final 10% to you? Because everybody has a different background, different experience. We all come from different size companies. So we all probably have different definitions of what the final 10% is. So what is that for you, Joe?
It is the 10,000 mosquitoes. And that's an analogy that is, when you are lost in the jungle, it is not the elephant that kills you. It is the 10,000 mosquitoes. And what I believe is that's the difference between a good game and a not so good game. And what happens at the end of the project is you're trying to wrap up everything, shut everything down, and say, I'm not doing this, but you notice tons of things because you're testing more, etc. And the only thing to do is, I'm a solo indie. I fix them right then. Boom. So I create this list that I hope is shrinking, but it does this. And for me, that's the real final 10% for me. So,
Awesome. Harrison?
Yeah, it's similar in larger studios as well, but there are cutoff dates where you get kicked out of the version control software that you're using, and you see a bunch of bugs that you want to fix. I see things that I've wanted to fix for a long time, but they've branched the code, and you can't actually do that safely because now they are trying to build a safety build, and if you even if it's just like, oh, I'm just going to move one thing left 3 inches, there's no possible way this would ever destroy anything. You just still can't touch that stuff. So they start making a list of things to change later if you get to do like day one patch or whatever. But it's really that percent time where you sort of rack up all the things you want to fix, and you have to really prioritize the things that are valuable enough to fix, that will hit enough people's faces, that make the quality of the game better, versus the stuff that you just kind of want to fix because it's bugging you. And that's the final 10% for my job.
I'm going to kind of agree with everyone that's come before me. It's always the one more thing. Like, there's always one more bug that you have to fix, one more feature that they want to slide in at the last minute, one more art asset that needs to go in before it goes live. this slide animation needs to be a little faster, needs to go slower, needs to have some sort of curve animation. Those one last final things that end up taking a very long time are the final 10%.
In my experience, the final 10% that's the mosquito bite is usually the thing that you didn't do at the beginning. You didn't set it up properly. You didn't plan on adding in the different kinds of strings that you needed to be able to make sure your game was translated to be able to reach multiple people in multiple countries. So basically you might have baked some things in, some art assets or something like that, that are culturally offensive. Those are things that I tend to see makes things draw out, at least from my point of view and my line of work. And also making sure you have it in your budget to do the things you need to be able to get it out to the platforms that you want to go out to. So that's
awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, so the way that we're going to break this down is we're actually going to follow through a development life cycle, so to speak. We're going to break this down into 3 different phases. Talk about pre-production and what you should do early in the project in order to prepare for that final 10%, what you should do in the full production thick of things, and then what you're supposed to do as you're getting to alpha, beta, release in that phase. So in the pre-production stage, what is the very first thing that you think that you should do in order to prepare yourself to put that best foot forward into actually completing this game? And it might be a redundant answer here.
And I'm horrible at this one. I am. There's an old expression. I got Topsy just grew. I think it is. I used to think it was a math thing, but I don't think it actually is. But I'm lucky. I'm a freedom. I'm a solo guy. I work an idea to death until I really have it in my mind. But then it's not I don't have a pre-production, so I really should just shut up and pass it down. I don't really have pre-production, so that's the bottom line.
It's gonna be a really short percentage for part 1 if you don't have anything to say about it.
I don't for part 1,
So in my experience at Telltale, I was the co-creator of Tales from the Borderlands, so it was just me and another guy in a room trying to figure out what the hell this thing is supposed to be. And we decided early on what the sort of thesis of the game is going to be. And we wrote it on a whiteboard, and we sort of pointed at that every single time we were going to make a story choice or a character choice or a story, choice about the season arc or the mechanics, and like does it push this thesis, does it push this feeling we're going for? And we really like hammered that into stone. We really came up with the pillars of the game, like from that feeling we came up with our like 4 or 5 core pillars of what this game's about. What is it, mechanically about? Was it narratively about? All that stuff. And that was the first thing we could do, so that later on when we were developing the game, we were trying to make some new mechanic or something, and we could like, point at that whiteboard and say, is it actually fulfilling any of these goals? And if not, then let's not put any time into doing that.
I'm going to have to agree with the pillars. You took the words right out of my mouth.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, I agree. Have a very core set of like the game mechanics, especially when I'm looking at it from the programming side. What is the minimum that this game can go out as a fully functional game? Anything excessive of that is polish. Hope we have time, additional feature type thing, because those are the things that you can't cut in the end. If you're running against a deadline, if someone's down your neck trying to get this project finished, you can't cut out, if you have a racing game, you can't cut out that you have tracks to race on. You can't cut out that you have to have vehicles to drive. But you can cut out that excessive like slot machine bonus, right? Those are the things that can go, and sticking to that and knowing that inevitably the game's going to go out and it can't go out without these pillars.
Yeah, I think it comes down to budget. What your budget is, what your intended budget is, and if your budget is you're living in your mother's basement or something, and it's just you, and you're developing something, you have all the time in the world. At what point are you going to say you're completed? To be able to make sure, like they're saying, the pillars or your signposts that say I've made it to X, Y, and Z. Because at some point you're going to have to try to go to somebody either to raise money, but make sure that you've got things in place so you can actually then go do that. Because at some point you're going to have to deal with a budget, right? So make sure that your features don't overwhelm your budget, and try to keep everything in tow. And as they're saying,
keep it as focused as possible so that way you know when you're done, and then you can then move it forward.
I think it's really important to remember that if you are an independent sort of game developer, and you can probably speak to this better than I can, but like you can just sit there adding features all day because you can, and it's like, oh, one more cool thing, but like scoping is so important. Yeah, like if you are an independent game developer, a board game, whatever that is, like set a date you want to hit. And like stick and like make that work for you. So you, even if you don't have a budget, you have a specific date that you're saying this is my ship date. Whether it's I'm going to take my game to a convention, there's a specific date that I'm going to take it to GDC and show someone or whatever, because that will help you when you only have a week left to go. Do I really need this other feature, or do I need to finish the content in the game? Well, it helps you sort of scope and make that decision.
Awesome. That goes right directly into one of our next points, which was milestones and checkpoints, and budgeting as well, and how that ties into it. So at this point, if you guys want to chime in on it, feel free to do it in any order that you guys want.
I do have finally something to say in this area.
Leave it on.
Okay. So I got thinking of all these words they use in budget. They're using things that I'm more like a painter that decides, okay? But there is times in my brain, and one other thing that makes it, I actually go, I'm trying to think back of the first game and what I did. But since then, all I do is, as soon as the game shipped, I just shipped a game today, okay? That code actually becomes the code for the next game. Mm-hmm. And then I immediately start thinking of just variations and stuff I'm going to do to it. And then I have this sense of enough is enough. And while I'm doing, the only thing I get as an indie is while I'm doing what I think is enough so that I can really, I'm trying to get it out in 6 months or this or that. While I get the enough is enough done, then I'll have a little feature creep or whatever, but I always constantly weigh, is it worth it? And luckily I don't have death by committee or have to convince anybody, but I have pads. I have several pads for several pieces of the game. And in this last game, for instance, I delegated a lot. So I do manage stuff. I manage an artist and the person doing story, etc. For me, the only thing I think I really have different than this, I really don't have a time. So I can always make that judgment and go, nah, we're okay. We're okay. Because it doesn't matter in me. It's not Christmas. There's no arbitrary deadline. There is Jesus, Joe, it's taken a year and 3, you got to shut it down. And I do get to that point where I go, take no prisoners, and that's that point in time. But other than that, it's a much more fluid thing, but I keep the list. I do what they do, but not, I don't get slowed down because I have to go show it to somebody and have a conversation about it. Mm-hmm. The conversation is in my mind while I'm driving. Mm-hmm. That's the big difference.
But when you also say it's a matter of like how much your time is worth at some point.
But that's why I mentioned the driving time is really free. I do some of my great thinking in it,
right?
And that's how I cheat, right? Because I can do things in a month, but still think about it for a couple of weeks while I'm driving. In a sense. Yeah. And I do get that freedom, and it's really nice. And that's how I fix it. I can still make that month, but I've really spent longer, and again, and I save so much time because I don't have to talk to somebody and have the debate, that. So I'm already fairly quick, but I'm slow in some ways too. I mean, I have the procrastination. I have that problem as a person. I don't have somebody doing this, but I'm trying to be useful here a little bit, and that's all. I didn't want to just say nothing at this point.
I do want to follow up with something that you did say though. One of the things that you said that you asked yourself is it worth it?
Yeah.
One of the things that I've really seen at all of the small studios that I've worked at is going into the scope creep. It's always chasing something, like especially in the mobile sense or in mobile gaming. There's always a new mobile game that's coming out. What can we do to replicate this into our game? Again, that's kind of where I got that slot machine example from. And the time that you spend chasing that hot new item, by the time you get it finished and completed and out, it's no longer a hot new item. And are you going to be able to get a return on that 2-month investment in your 99-cent mobile game? And I think that's something that, as a programmer, you can kind of, like, you know that you're spending a lot of time on, a feature that's not going to be going out, and I think that's going to tie into what we're going to talk about in a minute, but the burnout.
Yeah, and I think that this also ties in very nicely to what Harrison was saying earlier about establishing the pillars of the game and being able to identify what that game is ahead of time. So, these ideas come up, those new games come out with these awesome new features that you want to replicate, but is that core to the original idea that you guys came up with, and is that the essence of what this game is?
I mean, all creative people are divergent minded. You can always come back and say, well, I could have solved it a different way, or come up with a new idea. But I'm actually really thankful that I get to work with producers, and producers get this bad rap of being the sort of like fun police. They're like, no, you can't have that thing you want. Sorry, no. Which is true to a certain extent, but a lot of times you're saving you from yourself, and someone has to hold a designer or artist or whoever's feet to the fire and be like, look, you have a week. I'll give you the time you have. If you have a week to do that, if you want to experiment and try something out and add a new feature and whatever, but you have a week. After that, if it's not working, if it's not in, we're going to cut it because we have to make this game. We have to make this game by the specific time. And I think that it's really easy to get down on people who keep telling you no, but it's so valuable to me as a person who just wants to keep trying new things to have someone to say, okay, I'm going to give you that leeway, but it's within constraints. Like, you can't just go off and do whatever you want. And them setting those milestones to sort of prove that we're not just sitting in a room all day, going in a circle all day, because you can sit around coming up with ideas all day, but if you're not putting them in the game and creating something and playing it and going, okay, no, that's how you do it. You can sit around and say, should a guy's health be 50 or 60? You can have great arguments on either side of why it should be 50 or 60. You could spend a week doing that without a producer. You can just do that. With a producer, you say, well, let's try 50, let's put it in the game, let's try 60 and put it in the game, see which one plays better. And because of that, it forces you to iterate in the game faster than just kind of being a theoretical designer. And I think it's really, really important if you're not going to have your own producer, then to be your own producer and say, like, this is the time that I have to do this thing. I'm not going to squander it by just sitting on a whiteboard all day. I'm going to get in there and actually begin creating something.
I use a trick also for that, okay? So I actually don't code, sorry. I don't code until I have the idea really locked down in my head. So what I do is there's a lot of busy work I still have to do in grunt work, like go grab new songs from Partners in Rhyme, go do this, go that. And I have a whole list, like I told you. So if I've got a new thing that I haven't worked out yet, that maybe I would bounce off somebody if it was not just me, I won't do the work yet, but I'll go find something useful to do so my brain can percolate on the real thing. And then finally what happens is I usually get up in the morning and I finally get that idea, and I go, oh, this is going to be a great day because it's a coding day. And I really just get up and just start coding. So that's the trick I use. Otherwise, I'd be in trouble trying to code stuff that's really not locked down.
Sure.
So
I'm going to speak 1 second to what my colleague said earlier about, like, getting into whether something's going to be, the health is going to be 50 or 60. And I think an easy thing to say on my end as a programmer is I've been in a lot of studios where things are hard-coded in, where I actually have to go physically change a number, and that adds a lot to the time. Like, you eat up time having to build the game every time, run it through, whereas if you're trying to maximize the time of a team, get to the very end, it's nice to have those variables essentially external from the project, because as a programmer, I don't care whether the health is 50 or 60. I care that the game functions and the code is clean. So
that's a great point. I mean, one of the things that I often run into is there are things that are hard-coded in the game or a little bit harder to change, especially once you get to the end, because you're starting to dive into things that are duct tape and Band-Aids and stuff like that. So anytime that you can, use that little bit of time up front to prepare yourself for changes down the road, especially when it comes to programming and even when it comes to art and things of that nature. The more that you can do to set up anticipating changes down the road, the better it is. Localization too, right?
Yeah, try to be as flexible as you can. That's what I was saying. The last 10% is you're messed up. The mosquito bites are the things you didn't think about at the beginning. He's saying don't even start it until you actually are ready, until you're ready to go. Make sure your assets are in place. Make sure you have a clear objective as to what you want, so you know what the pillars are that are going to hold up the house. right? And then basically that way you have the flexibility to do what you need to do to make the changes that need to be made once you get into it and you're actually having the fun. Like you said, the good day, I get to code today because it's ready.
And you want it data-driven. And I actually spent a lot of work. This is one reason why I carry it over all the time. For me, what slows me down in testing is trying to get to the specific place in my program to go test. So I actually have the ability to just jump to any one of my 600 puzzles immediately. I can walk through the game in so many different ways. I can look at all the help texts at once. I build my own QA tools because I'm my own QA. And you want everything. That 50 or 60 should have never been in the program to begin with.
Exactly.
It should be given a name, and the producer or or whatever should be able to alter that and go, hey, here's it as a 50, here's it as a 60. Make a choice, boom, it's done. So.
And even in small studios, I've actually been in a studio where we didn't have like a huge way to control these things, but we had a Google Drive document that had different names, and we could call that Google Drive document at any points in the code, and it shipped as like a hard-coded Excel document in the end. But the designer and people on the other end can change whatever numbers they want, but it doesn't affect me having to do my job.
Yeah, you're going to have to iterate a lot.
Exactly.
I'm sure you all know. You're going to iterate a ton, so make sure you build the game in a way that allows you to iterate. So you're not redrawing the picture from scratch just to change one piece of it. You're going to iterate a whole bunch. You're going to chuck out a whole bunch of work that you did, even though it's perfect, just because it doesn't either fit into the new version of the game, or you need to scope it out, or whatever. So just prepare to do that and make sure that your game can support that kind of activity.
Yeah, I would say that if you're going to use any kind of like Google type of shared document or something, which is nice because everybody can kind of jump in if you've got a larger team. It's very, very nice, but make sure you keep the versioning. As soon as somebody's done, make sure you offload or you export a version of it, because we run in like localization just in general. Somebody gets in and they change one thing, one tab, one anything, and it's like the whole thing. They go back once or twice or 3 times, and Google is not the most stable thing in the world. And then everything goes black, and you wonder,
Can we go back to the version of the room with lights? Can we roll back that file so we have lights in here?
Exactly. Somebody hit so yeah, make sure if you're using anything like that, make sure you keep your versioning so you know like where it was at your last good save.
Yeah, learning how to use version control is really boring, but it will save your life. It will save your life. Yeah,
awesome.
sure.
I'm gonna cut it off here so that we can stay on in the interest of time. I do have one more question in the pre-production phase, and I'm really excited to hear you guys' answers on this one. But before I even say that, Harrison, that was the nicest thing I think I've ever heard a designer say to a producer. So.
Pre-production or
about having a producer and
source control? Yeah. God, please. Yes. So many times I've checked on a file and be like, oh my God, what have I done? And then just roll it back. Done. No problem. If you don't have that, you're in big trouble.
Because you code in fear.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You have to. I used to code in fear. I put off doing the.
So the last thing that I do want to ask though is team building. What do you guys do in order to figure out what kind of team you need in order to approach the project? How your teams are assigned to you, if that's the way that it works at your company, or anything of that nature? How do you figure out what do you need in order to execute this project, and then what do you do once you identify those people?
Have you seen Forrest Gump? Yes. I'm the feather. I got lucky this year. I got 2 people that found me. I pivoted what I wanted to do for Clutter 6 because of it. And my goal the whole time was to stay out of their way. And I got lucky. And I hope it happens again, et cetera. But I'm lucky, and that's all I'm going to say on that one. So.
Team building?
I have always been assigned to a team, but as a certified Scrum Master, I'm going to say that's project-based, multidiscipline teams are the best.
Yeah, I mean, you have to know, again, what are you trying to do with your game? You don't need an AI programmer if you are making an AI game. So really focusing on, again, the pillars. What is this game supposed to be doing if you're trying to find a team? What is the bare minimum of things that you need other people to help you with? UI art is different from character art, is different from background art, et cetera, environment art. So making sure that you can find somebody who can do all of those things, or you can find one person for each of those things if you want to do it that way. obviously comes down to budget and stuff like that for how many people you can afford. So if you can only afford 3 people, pick the 3 things that you think are important that you can't do without someone else, and then learn the rest of it yourself. I think, yeah, it just comes down to the pillars of the game again, and just making sure that you have people really support the things that are important to you to get in this game.
Just to add on to that, one of the things that I'd say is very important is, you guys have already said, identifying what the game is, setting those milestones, and then figuring out what you need to do in order to meet those milestones, and what's the minimum amount of people that you can have to do that. Less is more, and you can always add more people later on in the project if necessary and if the budget allows, but getting rid of people that are frivolous to the project is a lot harder and costly.
It's tough also in like school groups or independent groups where you have just like 15 people on one project, and like we're going to take this thing all the way to the end. You're like, you don't need half those people. You're going to have to go down to 6 people to make this game. It's like the saying that I've heard a lot is, you can't put 9 women on one baby, make it come out in 1 month. Like it doesn't work. That's just not how it works. Exactly. So you put more people on one thing, and eventually they're not going to support anymore. They just get in each other's way, and and that's not to say that, look, if you have too much work for one person, don't ask them to do 2 people's work in one day. If you need another person, get another person if you can afford one. But there is, like you said, a drop off where you're just like, these people they're not actually contributing anything to the project except sort of getting in our way. And we're actually we're spending more time trying to figure out how to utilize these people than actually making the thing.
Yeah, sometimes you don't really know that. I mean, until you're actually in it. You think you're going to, if you diversify, you got all these different people with all these different talents, all these different skills, you're going to get like all this great input. But then, of course, then you can get up with creeping, like that's going to start coming in. And then also you've got to, I think the most important thing is make sure there's a communication. There's people that you think you're going to communicate with. It could be artistically, it could be through the code, it could be shared experience, it could be whatever it is, but as long as you have an open line of communication so you can get from A to B in the quickest possible way. And some of that sounds kind of funny, A to B is not a very long way to go, but sometimes it takes forever to get there. Ask a hurricane, they'll tell you.
Yeah. One more thing that I want to add on to this, though, is team agreements are a very, very important thing, especially for people who are, working in indie teams and things of that nature. If you have other people working on your project with you, please, please, please take the time to actually write down what it is that they're responsible for, what you're responsible for, what it is that they're getting out of a cut of the game, if you're planning to monetize the game, how that's going to split. Because that's one of those things that once you get to the end of the project and it's done and then you're ready to put it out there and make money, then you're like, where do we go from here? And that can cause a lot of problems, a lot of dissent between the team members, and so on and so forth.
And also just get them on board with your vision. Like, make sure everyone, give them the pitch that you gave your bosses or you gave the producers or you gave whoever. Get all your people to be like, hell yeah, this sounds like a rad project. I get exactly what you're going for. Because then at the end of that last 10% where you're like, I want to go this way. Well, I want to go this way. And you're like, well, I thought we were going this way. And he's like, well, you thought we were going this way. And if everyone is fully on board with your vision, even if it's a PowerPoint presentation before you even start making the game, and everyone goes, okay, well, we all know what we're doing here, right? We all know what we're making. And everyone goes, cool, yeah, thumbs up. Then you're going to have a lot less problems in the long run with people feeling like they're not a part of they don't have any ownership over it, or they're not they're not instrumental in creating a thing that it's also their vision, because the last thing you want to do is work on someone else's vision where you don't feel like you're having any sort of real contribution to it. That sucks. No one wants to do that. So that's a good way to make sure everyone really feels like a part of it.
Use the key word there with ownership. You want to delegate tasks, but you also want to make sure you delegate the ownership if you want to. That's one of the things you need to be clearest on. And I would push for people delegating the ownership too. But because I think you get better product by doing that. But.
Also, try, if you can, checklists are great. Because at the end of the day, like he's saying, you don't know you're done until you've gone down and you've made sure that you've done all the things you need to do. Like that's great, we're done, but how are we going to get out to PlayStation if we haven't budgeted or made sense, or how we're going to handle our compliance testing?
So that's the wrap-up portion of pre-production, and that was definitely by design. We spent a lot of time on pre-production there because the earliest part of the project is actually one of the most integral parts of the project. That is the final 10%, because what ends up happening in the final 10% is you're uncovering the things that you didn't prepare for ahead of time in pre-production. So moving into production, let's talk about the thing that most teams face, and one of the things that stops pretty much every project that isn't completed, which is dips in team morale. And how do you manage that?
You get out the whip, and it's there is that point everyone reaches in a project where you're like 60% in, and you're like, it's not fun anymore, because it's like you're just literally now just making content. You're just like, we got to get this thing to the end. And I think, as I said before, making sure everyone understands the sort of vision we're going for, and like re-exciting people about the things that are already in the game and really cool, and like, man, this is awesome. Like, we're making a really cool thing here. Is really important to make sure that everyone understands why they're still putting all this time into this thing.
Hire type A's. Type A's are really aggressive. They detail oriented. They want to get things done. They don't usually have morale problems because you have to calm them down. I'm a type A. You have to calm them down so they don't do too much that's not in their area. So it was just my answer to the morale problem.
That's fine.
Which will tie into our next
It's a different way to do it, for sure.
Yeah,
It'll tie into our next point, which is the scope creep thing, because I think that's definitely ties in with that. But as far as if you are dealing with somebody who is a little bit more drained on the project at this phase because they're in the mundane parts of it, how do you work your way out of that?
I've actually seen where you take a break from the project, even if it's like a 2-day break. Like, let your programmer take a break and create some little offshoot thing that he's been thinking about for a little while. Or if your artists are tired of doing UI, let them have a creative time where they can draw anything they want. They could draw a concept art for a game that we aren't even thinking about making yet. Eventually you reach a point where you're spending a full day on something, but you're only operating at like 60 to 80%. And it seems counterproductive, but take 1 or 2 days off, and then you can come back functioning 100. It'll be a new problem again. It won't be the same problem that it was before.
I definitely agree with that. And one of the tricks that I've even learned over the time is if you're using those 1 or those 2 days effectively by play testing, getting people who haven't seen the game in front of it and seeing how they react to it. Because as Harrison said, you're already at that point where the bones of the game are there. The skeleton is there. So it's ready enough to get some kind of feedback on it. So if you get other people who haven't seen it before and you get their feedback on it and they get excited about it, it re-energizes you as well.
Yeah, even creating like demos and going out to small festivals and conferences and stuff like that, integrating with people that actually have seen it for the first time, it actually that invigorates you a little bit. There's a team that basically they had a demo. They built a demo and they had an idea, and then every time they would start feeling a bit down, their head producer would always like schedule them out to like go to a conference, and they would all go. And there was a team of about 14 guys and girls, but they would go and they would invigorate them because people were playing it. They had to watch people get excited. They had to answer the questions and find out there's a reason why they're actually doing it. It's a great idea.
And it also brings you back to that design phase that got you excited about the project in the first place, right? Because you're getting ideas from what people are seeing and what they're having trouble with. So it takes it back to the fun part in a sense, even though you still are working within the confines of what you already have there.
Yeah. I mean, there's a large mobile studio that will go unnamed, but in general, they like to have like once every other month or something, or 2 months, they'll have like kind of where they'll just go out and they'll challenge each other. They'll spend like 2 days just with each other, just developing something entirely different. They'll basically have they'll split off into teams like 10 or 20 or 15, and they kind of challenge each other on things that are completely outside of what they would normally do. Sometimes they come up with like apps for the company. Sometimes they come up with like different things that they can do. And it's not that the company is going to use it or for something else. It's just to get everyone's mind off of what they're currently working on, and it actually keeps them really motivated.
Awesome. So on the other end of that, once you are finally over that hump and you're getting back into the point where you're about ready for alpha, or maybe you have even reached alpha, pre-release time frame, and you're dealing with scope creep, how do you handle that, Joe? I'll let you go since you've already kind of touched on it.
About the only thing I want to say on scope creep is, and I didn't do it as well as I should have on this last time, but as soon as I implemented the deliverables section, and then they got told that once something is in the deliverables, they cannot touch it without permission. And that helped me, because it was like a week before ship, my music person realized that all the songs should have been longer. And I have 2 rules, by the way. One is it better than what we've already done, and is it good enough? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then save it for the next game. The answer is no, move on. But as soon as I did deliverables, and again, I didn't do it well enough because we still fixed things and didn't put them in the deliverables, but that helped so much to get them to know that they can't touch it again, right? I mean, that puts them in a different state of mind where it locks down. And until I notice something or they notice something and ask me, they can't just go fix it, so.
Harrison, I know you touched on having the producer there in order to help you with that,
Yeah,
but what else do you do to prevent yourself
It
from?
really is like, what is the game we're making? Like in Telltale games, we're not going to make a whole bunch of crazy shooting mechanics because that's just not what a Telltale game is. It comes down to, does it make the game better for the player? Like, does it enhance the experience for the player, or is it just cool because it's cool? Oftentimes, designers, and I include myself in this, we design stuff because it makes us look really smart, and it's really easy to start designing to feel clever and outsmart the player instead of just creating. You have to remember that the thing you're designing is for people to consume. So if you're not creating something that's going to add to the game, like the value of the game, you call it Metacritic or whatever you want to call it, then it's just not worth it. And also, like, what bang for your buck can you get? Like, is this a one-day feature that's just going to like be awesome and just like systemically just make the entire game better? Is it something that's just like, okay, well, we've added this feature, but now you're going to have to place it around the game? Is it a totally new chapter to the Walking Dead? It's like another part of like the 10-minute addition to the story. It's just like, well, those things aren't worth doing then, because the thing we're doing is already working. What is the problem you're trying to solve by adding this thing? If it's not solving a problem or adding like demonstrative value, then it's just never ever worth it. Put it in save your idea. There will always be time for another idea in another game.
As a slot machine developer, one of the questions that I always end up asking is, how does this affect overall gameplay, or coin in rather?
Right.
Like, are people going to play this game more? Are they going to spin the reels a few more times because of this feature, or does it really just make it prettier and not really make a difference on the overall outcome of the game?
And even if it does make the game better, like, how much better does it make it versus how much time you're going to spend
Exactly.
making this thing? And also, like, it can be really dangerous. You add a new feature, and it now, like, all the shops that I've worked on for 6 months or whatever now are broken because you added this new way that AI look at you, and like things are different now. Stealth is completely broken because you added this thing, and like you have to understand that there's always a knock-on effect of things you're going to add to the game that just seem cool.
Right.
I mean, no producer in the history of video games will let you just sneak something like that in. But even so, like, you have to understand that you could easily break a bunch of other people's work if you're on a team by just like coming up with a cool new feature.
Okay, so 2 seconds. So you asked about morale before. I pick up my own morale when I get a crazy idea and think, oh, Jim wouldn't let me do this. Oh, I'm doing it. And that's actually what keeps me going, because I fight my own, shit. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
Yeah, the second question that I ask after the coin in question is, what is the risk and how does it put us up against our deadlines that we talked about establishing before, right? If you have those things that we talked about at the very beginning, the pillars of what the game is and your deadline/budget, those are the two things that you're referring back to in order to make the decision on, is this something that we should pursue or not?
As a programmer, I think of it slightly different. When someone comes to me with this, scope creep, my first question is, what am I going to cut?
Yeah, that's true too.
What do you want me? Yeah, what do you want me to cut in order to sacrifice for this game? If we have a hard deadline, I'm the one that physically has to implement it. You're asking more of me. What can I cut to make this feature work for you?
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
We've often had to add features where we're like, okay, well, this is worth losing something else, but we're not going to pile on more work on our programmers.
No, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of the things that we were going to talk about, but skip for the sake of time, is prioritization and having a list of things to say this is what's most important, like you touched on before, right? This is the minimum viable product. And then after that, what is most important in order to give us bang for the buck? And reorganizing that list is exactly what you're talking about.
There's a company that does a bunch of space games, stuff like that. Stardock, I'll just say that's not a big deal. But they will create like a core game, I don't know if you're familiar with their games, Galactic Civilization, Ashes, Singularity, stuff like that. They're huge scoping space games, right? But they create like a core game, and then from there they'll start building it out from there. And they'll do things within the first version as an introduction to kind of like work on a mechanic, with knowing that it's not going to be perfect, and then they'll go on and then they'll take it out and they'll perfect it for the next build or the next thing that they're going to do. So yeah, and also with scope creep or feature creep, once you start to see it happening, the most important thing you can do that I've seen companies do is just call it out. Mm-hmm. Just call it out. Yeah. You know, if you just say, "I'm sorry, we're doing it right now. We got to stop," and then because it takes just as much time to take it away as it does to put it in. You know, and all that costs money. Yeah, and
absolutely.
Time.
So that wraps up the production section, and here we are at the alpha to release, which is probably the part that you guys expected for us to spend the most amount of time in, but I think will actually turn out to be the shortest one, right? So one of the things I do want to touch on is testing. Will you start us off?
Me? As for testing, there's always going to be things that have to be tested by a human. There's always going to have to be people who QA things, but having like a set of scripted tests that you can judge whether a build is stable or not, that should be going on during the entire development of the game. If you add a new feature, it needs a test, and it needs to be added to the test queue. You know, that way when someone does come in, there's a new feature that, you know, you want your AI to be slightly different, it can alert that it's setting off other tests immediately before it goes out to launch.
So lists. So as you're building the game, as you're going through stuff that you might think are going to be problems or things, you need to make sure you make a list of that, and it goes up on like a board or it goes on wherever you're going to put it, so people can go back and then you can have your checklist.
I was talking more of automated testing, but yeah.
Tobe, do you have anything else to add to the testing part of things?
Just as far as QA, always make sure you allow in your budget for somebody else to test it outside of it, because in my experience, if you're the lead developer, if you're the producer, or whomever you are, you've brought in people to tell you how great their work is. Right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Their job is to be proud of their work and what they've done, right? But the fact is, they also know where the weaknesses are, but if they're also trying to feed their families or do whatever else they need to do to be able to survive, okay? So nothing wrong with that. That's their job, and their job is to give you the best game they can, but it's also their job to make sure that they go, hey, look how nice and gleamy it is. Isn't it pretty, though? You know, so make sure you try to budget in there, or at least have somebody outside. That's the reason alpha testing stuff is important, but an actual company that comes up with that test case, like we were saying, that can actually make sure that it does work as it needs to work. All right, and that just make sure you've got that, because outside eyes will find more problems when they're going through the entire game and everything than your developers may even know about. Yeah. Or they may go, oh yeah, we thought we fixed that.
And when you do bother to have somebody play test your game, and you're the developer, what you need to do is shut up. If you open your mouth at all, your test is pointless. Yeah. It really is. You need to just keep your mouth shut and watch, because that's the only way you'll go, oh, damn, I need to put that in because he didn't realize something so obvious.
They're not going to ship a copy of you with the game. Right. To sit there and be like, no, you don't do that, you do this.
Yeah, make sure you allow for the two things. You need a comprehensive test, which is going to have somebody going through everything. See, try to kill Dora. Children's games, the lead character is not supposed to die, and the kids are supposed to win. So make sure you've got somebody that's actually trying to kill Dora, and you also have somebody that's trying to sprint through and get all the way through from beginning to end as fast as possible. So you need to make sure you've got those two contingencies covered.
Yeah, you need to have people try to break your game, and don't be scared of that. Like, there were problems. I can't remember which Telltale game it was, but there was a problem with a specific choice. There was a bug where if you let silence happen, which is the timer expires on the dialogue timer, 4 times in a row or something, some unexpected thing would happen. But because players were never, they were not supposed to just let that happen. They were playing the game normally. They were making choices. This really weird edge case just kind of slipped through to the very end until I, myself, or someone else found it. But you need to tell them to play in unexpected, weird ways. Play the way the game doesn't expect you to play it. in Mafia 3 drive the car in a crazy, like try and smash it through a building or try and ramp it off of, like things that we don't want players to do, but they will probably do because they have the freedom to do whatever they want with the game they spent their money on. You have to let them break that game as often as you can. And to everyone else's point, like test often, test early. As soon as you have something that's like representative of what your game's supposed to be, you can tell them like, look, this is just a vertical slice, or just test this one corner, the rest isn't ready yet. That's fine, that's all acceptable, but do that stuff as soon as you can, because they're gonna start giving you feedback like, the controls aren't great, or I didn't understand what I was supposed to do here, or whatever, and you'll only get that, the earlier you get that stuff, the more, the sooner you can get into the game, and you don't wait to the last 10% to try and jam all that stuff in when it's like it's way too late to change this stuff now. Like the combat in this section is often there's no time to change it.
Yep. And that goes for VR as well. I mean, like anything, like even like for raw data, they tested it. Like our teams went in and out like about 9-10 times, just to make sure.
And I think something important is, from a developer side, expect that there's going to be bugs. I've seen so much time wasted on people arguing whether something is a bug or not. I'm only human. I write bugs. It happens. Teach me, show me how you recreated the bug. I'll help you fix it. And sometimes the bugs aren't code bugs. They're also design bugs.
Sure.
So, keeping that open line of communication and not being offended.
Right.
And linguistic bugs later on. Yeah.
The very last question that I have for you guys is, I call this perfectionist syndrome, which is you get to that point where you realize the flaws in your game, or you realize some of the things that you want to improve upon. How do you know when to call it good enough? How do you cut it off?
Pokemon and drugs and Final Ship, just say no. Just stop, walk away from it, send it out. You have to be tough, but you look yourself in the mirror and slap yourself side the head and say, "It's done."
Yeah.
And you get rid of it. It's hard.
Yep. I mean, look, you have a producer. I mean, I'm lucky enough. I'm not an independent. I'm not a solo act. I have a producer who says, "This is when you're done. We're going to lock you out of source control." Like, you can't. I could not make more changes if I wanted to. There are certain points at Telltale when we would have bugs, and you'd have to actually submit an email to them to unlock the file, and they'd be like, "Why?" And you're like, "Well, there's this one thing I need to fix." How important is it? Like, you have to argue for every single little thing you want to change. So, like, luckily, I don't have to deal with, like, how do I take my hands off the controls, because someone just comes and yanks your hands off the controls, and they're like, "You're done. We're finished." And so you have to understand that no game's going to go out completely perfect. There are going to be bugs in every single game that you ever ship in your whole life, and someone's going to find them, and they're going to put them on the front page of Reddit, and that's life. That's life. And that's unfortunately, like, there's bugs that shipped in every single game I've worked on that I caught 99 of them, and the 100th one slips through, and that's just how it is. As long as you understand, as long as you understand that that's okay, there's a certain amount of acceptance that players have of that kind of thing, as long as it's not crashing desktop all the time and significant things. But if it's just a little weird thing here and there, then just learn to be okay with that, and learn to just, like, take a deep breath and just accept that that's just part of life.
Yeah,
It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Right.
One of the things that I actually saw, so for those of you who have seen Indie Game the movie, I think one of the parts that stuck out to me the most was when Phil Fish was talking about how he was working on Fez, and he got to the point where he saw his game and he was ready to go, and then he looked back at it as a whole and he realized, I've gotten so much better towards the end of this project, and now I want to go back and do it over again. And so he did that 3 times, and that's why Fez took so long to come out, right? Is because he got better and he saw that he could improve it. But as a producer, that's one of those things where I say, you were supposed to get better along the way, right? This is a growing experience. You will get better, and your next game will be better, and the concepts will be better, and everything will be better moving forward. At least you would hope so, right? Because if you're not getting any better, then what are you doing?
Better than what you've done isn't good enough.
Yep. Yep.
Unless it crashes, and then while you're fixing the crash, oh, that sounds twice as loud as it needs to be. You can go fix that last little one.
Yeah, I mean, when you got the file open, when you got to
Right. I've snuck so many fixes in because I had the
open,
file
right?
out. I've snuck in so many fixes. I had one file out. And that's legit. You can do that.
Yeah, but make sure you lock things along the way. You lock it, it's done. You put it aside. And then when you get it, then you know when you're done.
Yeah.
Because whenever you get to my point with localization, time you hand over to us, if the files aren't locked, if the text isn't locked, then it's crazy. It's insanity.
Yeah. So a lot of information has been thrown out here, and I hope that you guys have got good notes and stuff like that. But if there's anything that I would say to take away from this, it's definitely to think about things early on in the game. And the more that you can do in pre-production and in those early stages, the better off you are down the road. That's what really sets you apart. That's what really helps you finish, and that's what helps you overcome that final 10%. Yep. Thanks, guys. Do you have any questions? We got just a couple minutes for questions.
All right. You talked about doing demos and playtests for morality. What happens if the feedback is bad? You realize the game is just not fun.
So the question is, what happens if you're playtesting and your feedback is that the game is just not fun? What do you do then?
God
create it.
Oh. I was gonna say, God bless you, Michael. Can it?
I mean, also you can look at, there's a guy who had a game that he was taking out playtesting at all the places, and it was a simple game where a cloud bounced around and everything, and basically it was just so people didn't like it eventually because it was too difficult at the beginning because it wasn't inclusive enough. He was trying to beat everybody, and so try to find out why they're not liking it. Number one, because if you have an idea you like it, somebody else might like it. But you have to, but ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask more questions.
Yeah, I think that it depends on where you are in the game's development. If you're early on and it sucks, well, every game sucks at the beginning. Every single game is unfun at the very beginning. If you're like, this game is done, everyone's like, I hate this game, then it just might not have a core loop. But I agree completely. Ask questions, try and figure out why some people. If one person tells you it sucks, then you don't really have to listen to them. If 3 people tell you one specific thing sucks, then maybe you should figure out why. Maybe the controls aren't great, or it's too difficult, or whatever.
Ask the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason not to. But yeah, it's just, you have to be honest with yourself. If you look at it one day and you're like, nah, this isn't very good. And I've made plenty of games like that where it's like, nah, you know what, this isn't very good. It's okay to put it aside. You don't have to delete it and throw it in the trash can and set it on fire. Like, you can come back to it later and be like, oh, I know it's missing now. I figured it out. Like, there's no one's gonna slap it out of your hand eventually. So.
But you're going to be better next time.
And that's my point to that is going to be, like I said before, you're getting better every time that you work on a game. So what I would say do, depending on where you are in the game, what your budget is, there are a bunch of other factors that go into it, but do the very minimum that it takes in order to finish that game, wrap it up, complete it, do whatever you're going to do with it, ship it, house it, whatever, but use those learnings to move forward. The worst thing that you can do is stop at that stage and just completely can it 100%. Unless, there are exceptions to that,
Unless
right?
it's really bad,
right.
really bad.
That or that budget's going to crash you or anything like that. Like, there are exceptions to that, right? But if you're doing this as like a hobby project, or you have, the only confines that you have are your own time, still do what it takes in order to finish that project, get it done, get the experience of actually finishing a project, and then you'll be better at finishing it next time.
I'm going to talk more about why I say can it. I know Michael personally, and I know the project he's been working on.
Ouch.
And I wish that they would take the lessons that they've learned from that project and move on. It's been 12 years in the making.
Yeah, so you didn't tell us that. That's totally different.
Yes, so it's been out for 12 years and still in beta. And I told them that they needed to take the lessons from that project and move on and quit adding to it, quit moving around, because 12 years later, if it's not done, it's never going to get done.
That's true.
All right. Question. The question is, how do I prioritize the features that I want in a game in the early stages?
So I can't speak to Mafia 3. I was a very small cog in a very large machine, and I wasn't, I didn't have much to do with the original stuff. But I will say, not to self-plug, but I am doing a talk on this exact topic tomorrow at 11:30, which is, it's important. I'll give you the brief example right now. I'm not going to make you come just for that answer. But prioritize it based on the feeling you want your player to have. So if you are making an action-adventure game, if the thesis or the sort of design North Star that you write on the whiteboard is I want my players to have the freedom to explore the world at their pace or whatever, then you know kind of the mechanics and theme that you're going to be looking for to really push that feeling forward. The Mafia games have a fantastic sense of time and place. It's set in our version of New Orleans in 1968, and like all the design decisions were about that, about the main character, about his experience, about telling a very specific story that came first, and all of the things you do in that game sort of spun out from there. So I think that the short answer, and I'm sure that everyone else has sort of opinions on this too, but figure out exactly what you want your game experience to be. Figure out what you want, like the 3-hour experience to be. Figure out what you want the 30-second version of that to be, like the minute to minute. Like, am I running and jumping and slashing things Witcher style? Am I, building houses, Fallout 4 style? Like, what am I trying to push on the player to really push the specific feeling that I want the player to have? And that will help you quickly narrow down the things that you need to design, things you don't need to design.
It's a story.
One more question.
Yeah, or just the feeling though. The theme could go in a different direction. So.
Right.
I have a question. For games that get published like every other year, I can point a couple names, but I'd really rather not right now. But Clutter? One? No.
Too many of those games.
It starts with Assassin's Creed. Where they have the same pillars for every single game, but they add a little bit onto it. I don't know exactly how they go through their process, but like, is there, if you're working from the same structure for future games, is there a point where sometimes you'll try and rush through the early to just get into the game, or do you spend more time in those moments?
So in a nutshell, if you have a franchise or something where you have a bunch of code that can be reused for the next sequel or the next iteration of that game, how much time do you spend in the pre-production versus diving into what separates it from the earlier installments in that series?
So that's what I don't want to be the only one.
I always have my since game one. I always have a working prototype of the game. And again, tomorrow or Monday, I will actually make a new directory called Clutter 7. Everything from Clutter 6 goes over. I go in and change the 6 to 7 in a couple places.
Man, your games are easy to make. Wow. Why am I not just doing that?
It is fun. It's fun. But so it's always working, and bigger companies don't do that. I mean, and they want to go to a new platform, or they want to use a new hardware thing. I mean, I'm working on code that could work 10 years ago. So.
Yeah, I mean, know your audience. I would say know your audience. That's what he's saying. And like with Assassin's Creed, you could binge play it. I binge played that game. You start at the beginning, and I was late getting into it, which I think was the best way to do it. And so it's like, I think that you just know your audience, and if they're know what they want out of the next version, and then just build on it a little bit if you're going to do that. If it's a match 3 game, then make sure that your reskin has like a new twist to it, or a new thing that you're going to add to it that makes it a little bit different. I mean, there's all different versions of getting to that answer.
I would say be careful of adding too many twists on top of one another, because then you get what I call like the Farmville syndrome, where Farmville at its basic, all the moms were playing it. And then they slowly added baskets, and then they slowly added animals, and then trees, and all those things were. And eventually there was just so many little things that you had to do just to get to the next level. And I get where they were going with it, but my mother was a huge advocate of Farmville, and would call and tell me about her cows that ran away. It was her daily thing, and I didn't know whether she's talking about real cows or Farmville cows, but eventually she just quit playing, and I asked her, like, Mom, why did you quit playing? She's like, it's just too complicated. Like, eventually you get to the point where if you you can don't layer too many little things on top of one another because it becomes too complicated. It's no longer fun. You destroyed what it was.
Or make it a different game.
Yeah.
Or make it a different game.
Yeah, I think that's, and again, I can't speak to any other company's games or anything, but I think that like just pick the one thing and do that well. And if you're going to make another game in a franchise, hypothetically, pick one thing to upgrade or change and just do that well. There's something to be said, like players like comfort, but they also like surprise. So I think that changing things too drastically can also scare them away. You need to understand, how does this fit into the bigger picture of the things that I've already played? How does the experiences they've already had sort of like tie into this thing? I'm not even talking about like the lore and the story and stuff, just like how does that experience inform the experience I'm going to have? Do all my skills go out the window now? Is like running around the world completely different, use different buttons and stuff? I think like those games change the control scheme like every single game slightly. Like the first game, like the buttons were like your left and right hands and left and right feet or something crazy, and like then they went away from that and went to a different scheme, and every single time you play those games you have to relearn all the controls. So just pick one thing and I think just really improve on that one thing.
Awesome. So we're out of time, guys. We're going to wrap it up here, but just remember that in the final 10%, probably 7, 8, 9% of that final 10% is something that you could prepare for in the first 10%. So think about the end when you're starting the beginning.
So the one last thing after you're done, remember you have to get it out to your audience. So always keep in mind localization, keep in mind your LQA, which is linguistic testing, and also make sure compatibility and compliance, you've allowed for that for your release dates, and make sure that you have a good deal with your publisher at the end, so you figure out what they need and what you need.
Start, or you're wasting your time.
Yeah. Right.
So. We'll probably be here for a brief couple of minutes just to answer any other questions that we didn't get to, but enjoy the party tonight, and thanks for coming.
Woo!